If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hey all, welcome to this bonus episode. This year I spent some time at Worldcon interviewing a few interesting people. As I mentioned previously, these are out of chronological order. Today we have my interview with author Charlie Stross. I want to again thank Charlie for doing this interview with me. He's a big part of my personal fandom, and I was so excited and nervous to be able to do this interview. This was the first interview of the conference. Anyway, here it is. Hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, this is Alan. I am here at Worldcon 2022. I am sitting here with the amazing Charlie Stross. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on our podcast. How are things going?
Things are going about as well as you could expect in year 3 of the zombie pandemic movie we were all conscripted into. A very stupid zombie pandemic movie, if you don't mind me saying so. Other than that, things are going great.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up because I do want to hit on the absurdity of world politics at some point in this discussion, or not world politics, maybe world events is what I should be saying. But first, I really want to say that I'm a huge fan of your Laundry series in particular. And, obviously I'm not the only one. You've been working on this world for about 20 years, and there's not a whole lot of authors that can say they've been working on the same world for that long, right? And just for our audience, if you don't know, the Laundry series is a kind of dark comedy satire meets Lovecraftian horror. The first stories kind of start out on a personal level, skewering corporate IT life and following the main character, Bob Howard. I guess my first question for you is, what was the inspiration for coming up with this world in the series?
Okay, we need to go back a few years before I began writing the Laundry Files. I'm a child of the Cold War. I grew up in the UK during the 1970s and 1980s, and my entire generation was blighted by the fear of being wiped off the face of the map in a nuclear holocaust dictated by vast cool minds in other nations with incomprehensible motives. A kind of Lovecraftian situation.
Yeah.
And a lot of us basically have PTSD from that period.
Yeah.
And around 1992, after the Cold War, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I began trying to write a short story to distill how I felt about it. And it took me several years to omit something that ended up being published under the title A Colder War. A Colder War was a novelette that's basically a sequel to Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, in a timeline in which the Pavody expedition of 1933, I think it is, was followed by a race to remove all the Great Old One's artifacts from the city in Antarctica. And some of them were collected by Nazi Germany, others by the United States. They were parted out and became tools of terror on either side of the Cold War. At one point, we have a presidential briefing in the White House where the phrase, "Mr. President, we cannot allow a Shoggoth gap to emerge," is uttered. And this thing gradually works up towards a crescendo of absolute terror when World War III does break out. It is a World War III in which Cthulhu is one of the weapons. And people kept coming up to me and asking for more of this, but it was such a grotesquely horrifying world, I couldn't write any sequels to it. It ended up being collected in some of Gardner Dozois's year's best SF anthology, and then collected thereafter in numerous Lovecraftian anthologies, because it apparently struck a chord.
And I'm going to say, I'll jump in real quick and say that is actually how I found out about the Laundry series.
Yeah.
I read that one in his collection, and I was like, oh my God, I have got to read more of this.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't write any more of that one, for reasons that should be fairly obvious if you've read it. But about a year later, I sat down and thought, well, I want to write something similar-ish, and I just gave myself a license to creatively write a short comedy novel. Now, for a long time, I've had an affection for the British spy thriller, and in particular, the sort of seedy, low-budget, peeling wallpaper environment of the British government agencies, with endless paper shuffling and bureaucracy and the occasional sudden death moment. More Len Dayton, or Slow Horses for that matter, than James Bond. James Bond is almost a perfect photographic negative of the realities of spying.
Yes.
And I had this idea, if magic is a branch of applied mathematics, computers are tools for doing maths really fast. So we have a field of computational demonology that has been exploding since 1945. And of course you've got a government agency trying to protect us from alien horrors from beyond space-time. Anyone who's particularly good at the wrong type of computational theory will end up being drafted into this secret spy agency, if for no other reason than to keep them out of trouble. And our protagonist, Bob, is basically a sandal-wearing, Slashdot-reading computer geek circa 1998, who's fallen into a Len Dayton spy agency. And it's situational comedy of the protagonist is a fish-out-of-water variety.
Yes.
And the first novel follows Bob as he goes in over his head, finds himself on active duty, and gradually gets sucked down a rabbit hole of nightmarish proportions. And that was all very well. That nearly sank without a trace. It was serialised in an obscure, short-lived Scottish science fiction magazine that folded in 2002. And my agent looked at it and rejected it because she said, I have no idea how to market this. It's too cross-genre. Yeah. There is no market for comedy, horror, spy thriller spoofs about Lovecraftian monsters.
Yeah.
And there it would have rested until Golden Griffin, a small Lovecraftian publisher, got in touch and said, do you have any novellas we can publish? I said, well, no, but I've got this short novel. So I sent them a novel, and they said, well, we really like this, but it's too short for one of our books. Can you write a novella to go with it? And I wrote a novella to go with it about what Bob did next, titled The Concrete Jungle.
Yes.
And they published these two in due course as a hardcover, small press print run, and much to everybody's startlement, The Concrete Jungle won a Hugo Award in 2005, which made it absolutely impossible not to write and sell a second book, The Jennifer Morgue.
Yeah.
And while The Atrocity Archives was basically a Len Dayton pastiche with added hacker humour and Lovecraftiana, The Jennifer Morgue was a Bond movie in book form, with tentacle monsters.
Yes.
And things kind of snowballed as the two books were picked up by my American science fiction publisher, Ace, and they commissioned a couple more books, and I iterated through a Anthony Price novel, a greatly underrated British spy thriller writer, and then Peter O'Donnell's Modesty Blaze, and then I got bored with pastiching other authors' spy stories. From there I started pastiching actual genres, because the fifth book, The Rhesus Chart, was the vampire novel.
Yes.
Followed by the superhero novel.
Yes.
Then the elf novel, or rather the elven invasion novel, because elves are hominids from another timeline. They've developed magical combined arms warfare, and they ill-advisedly invade England after having... they're the survivors of a thaumaturgical nuclear war, or equivalent. They've been living in a bunker for 1,000 years, gradually dying as their suspended animation runs down. And they finally decided, in a desperate move, they're going to invade the only other timeline they know of that's occupied by sort of Iron Age barbarians. Or at least it was 1,000 years ago when they did their reconnaissance. And they interpret what they see there through their couple of remaining spies in their own terms, and they totally misunderstand what they're looking at. And things escalate to the point where we have, of course, got the dogfight between the Dragons and the Eurofighter Typhoon fighter jets, which is far more even than you might expect at first sight. And a major British city ends up as a smoking crater. As you can imagine, the laundry has been, for its history, sweeping bad problems under the rug. Losing a city is too big to sweep under the rug. The next book opens with Bob being interviewed on national television as to what happened. Bob wasn't in the country at the time, so he's one of the few people who's not suspended pending the public inquiry.
Yes, he was in Japan.
Yep. Which is the subject of a much later novella. But by the end of that book, I had to rewrite that particular book following the Brexit referendum because it was quite clear my first draft was nothing like insane enough to match reality.
Okay. Let's stop there. Let's stop there because I do want to talk about that kind of stuff specifically. But first, I want to go back to the laundry just a little bit in what you did in the writing of the laundry. So it really starts out, like you said, following Bob, right? And it's like his problems in the office and like, oh, wow, these monsters are real. How can I deal with these monsters personally? And you've got a number of novellas that kind of go along with that as well. And then you slowly expand out, and then next thing you know, you've got the Europeans getting together with the English trying to deal with the monsters under the sea, right? And then you have Bob come to the United States, right? And so you're gradually kind of expanding outward from just Bob into the rest of the world. I guess I'm curious, why the escalation in scope? You could have kept it personal to Bob and just like kind of like a Buffy the Vampire kind of thing, you know what I mean? But instead you've chosen
I made a decision really early on, because the second novel was written about 4 years after the first, that the characters in it were going to age by 1 year of wall clock time per year in the fictional universe. So by about book 4, it was set about 8 years after book 1. And Bob has been aging and being promoted along the way and acquiring new power-ups.
Yes.
Here's the thing, really powerful protagonists are fundamentally uninteresting. They can't tell you as much about the universe as less powerful protagonists. Also, Bob is an unreliable narrator. We're seeing everything through his viewpoint, and his viewpoint is rather biased. He doesn't understand everything he's seeing, and he has the cognitive biases you'd expect of a mid-20-something to then mid-30-something white male. Book 5 is told by Bob, and he has definitely leveled up, even though he doesn't realise it, because he walks into a nest of vampires and walks out again, and, maybe his hair's a bit mussed.
Yeah.
So it should be no surprise that when we get to book 6, which is told by Mo, from her viewpoint, Mo is his wife, and separated at the time due to the events of book 5, we get a different perspective on him. And then I began iterating through other viewpoints, because what I realised was I was writing a universe, not just one man's story.
Yeah.
The most recent books, in fact, I'd like to add, Dead Lies Dreaming and Quantum of Nightmares weren't originally intended to be laundry books. They were intended to be a different series, a spin-off series in the same universe. They got handed in as COVID lockdown was happening and my publisher was beginning to do work from home.
Yeah.
And the message kind of got lost on its way to marketing, which is why they're sold as laundry files. But really, it's a different series.
Huh. I did not know that. That's very interesting.
The real laundry series ends before Dead Lies Dreaming is set. There's an actual story arc of the laundry, and I've got one novel to write to finish it.
Yeah.
But the universe goes on, and some of the characters survive and continue. I'm not going to tell you who at this point.
Yeah, no, don't. I can't wait to read it. I'm looking forward to it. So earlier you kind of alluded to the absurdity of the events of the world right now and how you had to rewrite a book because of Brexit and all of that. So my question for you is, how do you, with the absurdity of the events of the world right now, how do you keep things funny and on point? Like, how do you just keep on your game?
Well, for a while I was kind of satirising the political developments because after Book 8, the British government has been taken over by Nyarlathotep. We have the government of the new management, strong and stable, run by an elder god, where the reason the government is evil is because evil is the entire point. People are now reading this as consolatory utopian reading because the government is evil but competent, rather than just evil but hapless.
Right.
But it becomes very, very difficult to stay ahead of the game where there's so much chaos happening.
Yeah.
And indeed, the most recent novel I've handed in, which is due out next May or June, Season of Skulls. It's the third new management book. It's a sequel to Dead Lies Dreaming and Quantum of Nightmares. It focuses around Eve Starkey, who puts the execute into executive assistant. She's the personal assistant to Rupert de Montfort Big, who we can pigeonhole as magical Ernst Stavro Blofeld. And it sort of reflects the Atrocity Archives, the first novel, which was the protagonist in Fish Out of Water territory, because Eve Starkey is really not a Regency heroine. So when she wakes up in 1816 in the village of Portmeron in Wales, which wasn't built for another century after that, to discover it's an internment camp of captured French sorcerers during the Napoleonic War, and she is assigned an identity. She is number 6. Who is number 1? You are number 6, and so on. It's a prisoner riff.
Yeah.
People kept nagging me to do a laundry historical novel, so I gave them the laundry historical novel they weren't asking for, and at the same time it got me off the hook of trying to satirise the way British affairs are going this year, which is just beyond belief.
Yeah.
The term omnishambles has been used repeatedly. Basically, we're going for about 6 crises simultaneously in parallel, and the government is out to lunch.
Yeah. This segues perfectly into the next question I had. I read your blog pretty frequently, and I think, you do a great job of taking all these disparate threads and kind of tying together and giving people a realistic view of what may or may not happen. I mean, to the point where I think reading your blog is more informative than reading the news half the time. So whatever that says about me, maybe, but I mean, because the news will hedge on everything and say, well, we know this, and at least here in the United States, they can't even come out and call Trump and the MAGA people fascists when they clearly are, right? And so I think in a way your blog can be more informative in understanding what is happening in the world. So I guess my question is, like, how are you able to tie together all of these threads and kind of understand what is going on in the world, and what is the feedback cycle between, reality and what you're writing there, your nonfiction and your fiction? How do those things inform each other? So I guess there's a lot of questions there.
Well, I have very little influence on the world at large. I write fiction. People read my fiction, and sometimes they have more influence on stuff going on around them, but hey, I count that as a win if it happens. Realistically, though, I try to analyse what's going on in the world around me, and bear in mind that the news media we're consuming is really there to maximise advertising click-throughs, which requires engagement rather than informing the public. The public service mission that newspapers claimed to have a century ago has long since faded, and it's been replaced by entertainment. They're competing with other entertainment media. And yeah, there are nuggets of information buried in there, but you've got to bear in mind that conveying information accurately is not what the newspapers or the news channels are about. So I try and go digging up stuff that is a quantitative reporting and figure out what it really means. And then I find I need antidepressants.
Yes, we have a contributor to our podcast who works for a nonprofit called Public Citizen, and what they do is or what he does specifically is he researches the evil things corporations are doing, and then he writes articles about them, and then sometimes they help take these to court, sometimes they present things in front of Congress or whatever. So yeah.
I find it useful to think of corporations in terms of slow artificial intelligences. Corporations have processes that can be executed regardless of the human employees they have. Human employees are just basically interchangeable components within a mechanism for procedurally executing business policy and generating profits. They've been gradually evolving for a couple of hundred years now. In many cases, they're trying to automate their internal processes by replacing human workers with automation or AI.
Yes.
So they are very, very inefficient AIs. But the thing is, they have motivations, and their motivation is to generate revenue and profit. And they have no way of conceptualizing the externalities they impose on the environment they work in. It is perfectly natural for an oil corporation to fund think tanks to disseminate anti-green talking points, for example, because firstly, it's tax-deductible activity, donating money to charities, and the think tanks are configured as charities. And secondly, they cannot generate more profits if legislatures pass hostile laws that reduce their profitability. You can't really blame a lion for eating a gazelle. It's what they have evolved to do. But if we're in a position to have control over the evolution of corporations, maybe we should be doing this proactively.
Yes.
A lot of our current position is our political systems in the West have been hijacked by free market fundamentalists who believe
Yes.
the free market is a utopian perfect ideal that can do no wrong, rather than a set of choices we impose. I mean, we have a legal system that recognizes that just because a business model is profitable, it does not follow that it is legal or moral. This is why we have laws banning child pornography or banning illegal narcotics. But we don't apply these laws or this way of thinking to certain other business models which really are toxic and which have, to a large extent, reshaped the economic environment we live in. And this has been getting worse for a long period of time, particularly since the late 1960s, early 1970s. And I can't help thinking we're heading towards a crisis point, because with climate change becoming so obviously detrimental on all sides, something's got to break soon. I just hope it isn't us or the agricultural system, which we all depend on for food.
Yes, absolutely agree with everything that you just said, and the take on corporations being slow AIs is an interesting one. I'm definitely going to be thinking about that for a while. Well, I know I promised you a quick interview, so we're coming up on time. So after what you just said there, my next question is a question I ask everybody who comes on here. What brings you hope in light of all of these things that you just said?
The fact that we can still be surprised by current events. There's always the hope that there'll be a positive surprise for once, a black swan with a silver lining, as it were. I was writing Near Future SF about 15 years ago, and I came up with a recipe, which is, when projecting 10 years ahead, 70% of what's going to be here in 10 years' time is already here now. The buildings, the cars, the people. 70% of them are currently alive, on the road, or visible on all sides. 20% isn't here yet. People who haven't been born, cars that haven't been made, buildings that haven't been built. Also, stuff that is predictable, such as the next generation of microprocessors. In fact, the next couple of generations, the next generation of cellular telecoms. It's not here now, but we know its general shape and we can expect it to arrive. But there's about 10%, which is totally random crap that nobody predicted. Nobody had any idea that COVID-19 was going to come. Well, not quite true. There was a book back in 1994 that won the Pulitzer Prize, The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett, that predicted there would be an emergent zoonotic viral pandemic that would kill millions of people and go global at some point in the next generation. And she's live tweeting it now.
Yeah.
But nobody could predict when it would happen. It was a black swan. And I think now if I was going to redraft that rule, instead of a 70-20-10% ratio, it would be about 60-20 and then 20% unpredictable random shit, because things have gone very weirdly non-linear in the past generation.
Yeah.
Who expected a Nazi comeback?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. All right, thanks for that. Lots to think about there. Professionally speaking, I think you already mentioned this, but just remind us again real quick, what new stuff do you have coming up?
My next novel coming out is Season of Skulls and will be sold as the 12th Laundry Files book. Alternatively, the third book in the new management series that began with Dead Lies Dreaming and Quantum of Nightmares. I've just finished writing another novella set in the Laundry universe, A Conventional Boy, which isn't scheduled for publication yet. It's so shiny and new, my agent is kicking the tires and it hasn't gone to an editor yet. It's the origin story of Derek the Dungeon Master, and it deals with the satanic D&D panic of the 1980s in the Laundry universe.
Okay, I love it already. I just love it. Just so you know, I'm a few books back from where you left off, although I did read the one that takes place in Japan, and I haven't gotten to the new management ones yet. But I have run into Derek the Dungeon Master. That's very,
I began writing this novella in May of 2009, but it hung fire for ages. Yeah. It was really meant to come out before the Nightmare Stacks, but it's being written out of order.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Can't wait to get a hold of that and read it. So last thing, where can we find you online?
& C. Stross on Twitter, and I have a blog I'm not going to try and recite the URL because it's not a short one. Email me and I'll send it to you.
Okay, sounds good. I can put those in the in the podcast notes. So thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate meeting you. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. It's been great.